Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's V the Gorilla coming to you live on this edition of ESW Rogue News. And I got my main man, Cowboy, working the airways, making sure the broadcast is coming out crispy and clean. And we have the man of the hour who needs no introduction. And folks, if you've been living under a rock, you need to get a hold of Veles. Veles will give you the intelligentsia, the play-by-play, the behind-the-scenes intelligence debriefing. And I recommend everybody to have a notebook ready and your dark roast in hand. And with that being said, good morning, gentlemen, to both of you guys. How are you guys doing?
Morning, V. Morning, Algo.
Morning, guys.
Veles, where should we begin, man? Lots of things happening, lots of things going on. Take us into the dark side, my friend.
Absolutely. To quote Patrick Stewart from Star Trek, engage. Yeah, to all of you in the audience and to my girl, Valley Girl out there, I'm probably going to, as Nick and I kind of take on, and V, forgive me, we didn't inform you of this yet. As Algo and I kind of take on some different aspects of what goes on here at ESW Rogue, I'm probably going to set up a neutral email box and put it out there on one of my next programs with all of you, so I can start moving some of you into Discord. I know over the past couple of years, some of you got kicked off Discord because of the whole thing during the COOF and similar, but and there have been many questions asked by people saying, hey, how do I get on Discord? And the simple answer is we have to send you an email. But we need a kind of a company email box for that, to do that. We got a lot today. And the latter half is going to be a bit intense. Honest to God. I've watered it down a bit, and my normal apology, I had to cut a lot of content out of today's program to make room for today's program, but that just means I've got more content for the next time I show up. And my kudos to Algo and V for a hell of a job, basically the last 2 to 3 weeks, with everybody from Burlingame to Matthew Arrett rejoining us, and we were able to turn the carrier into the wind and get Gus back on after he had to go manage some things down south, which when I'm in Miami and somebody says down south, that means something completely different. But anyway, along those lines, and I know that just for any of you that are listening to today's program on whatever platform you may be listening to it, and as I've said repeatedly, to quote Mike Moore of True Pundit, you got to stick and move, people. You got to stick and move. I know some folks that are like, oh, you're back on YouTube. We never left. We just got kicked off. That's all that was. So we were on Rumble. And now what we're having to do, for reasons not worth getting into, is we many times are doing these programs on YouTube, and then we go post them on Rumble, for those of you that may be listening to this program on Rumble at a later time. So anyway, we will keep the fires lit and keep you out there. But while we're on this topic, for those of you who could, it's just a personal thing. And it's not an accurate number. We know that because we have the administrative rights to our platform here on YouTube. But we currently show at 89.3 thousand subscribers. It'd be fantastic if we could bump that number back up to 90. So if you all would either recommend to friends and family or those you know to subscribe, and or subscribe yourself if you haven't been subscribed, please do so. So moving right along. First item in the appetizers section, missing money. It's been discovered $100 million, please insert Dr. Evil, in aid money provided to help those affected by the California Palisades fires last January is, well, missing. The funds were... I can just see V grasping his coffee cup. The funds were directed through non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, whose financial reporting is less thorough than, let's say, a publicly traded company or even public organizations. Many will say those funds were directed to the Democratic Party, given their connections to these NGOs. You can make that argument, but remember, if this funding mechanism was set up in Texas, that money just as easily could have ended up in Republican coffers. So what's your main takeaway? Well, as you may have heard, in California's leadership, they've been talking a lot, both at the mayor's office level and the governor's level. They want to convert much of the Palisades region into affordable housing. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the real estate in California, if you were to look at a map of California and you look at, let's say, Los Angeles and where the 405 is, the highway that kind of loops around Los Angeles, If you go up and to the left, thank you for the graphic, Algo. If you go up and to the left on that map and run along the coast, that basically, that kind of forested region, those mountains, that's the Palisades. And it's big. It's like Manhattan big. And so what the government of California has been saying is they want to convert that into affordable housing, which even for native Californians, regardless of their politics, have said, whoa, wait a minute. Now, those who own that land or those plots up there where the homes burned down, they've been getting the runaround from state investigators and others that have been slowing down their ability to get paid and or decide, hey, do I want to rebuild or do I just want to sell the property? And there are comments in various circles that say the state of California wants to pay them a lowball figure and get them out of there. So that $100 million of funds was set up to help those property owners. It was donations and things to help those property owners get by until their sale or rebuilding of their property was resolved. Now it will be much harder. Although the mayor's office, and I always love it when this happens in California, now the mayor's office and the governor's office have said, well, we're fast tracking people's ability as long as you're using one of these kind of prefab designs that will authorize you to use, because you've got to fit within California's regulations. What do you call it? A lot of folks have said, well, wait a minute, your prefab designs sure look like affordable housing. So state.
Oh my God.
Cartoons. I've posted several Pinky and the Brain cartoons on Discord. Some of you might say, what the hell is that? That was a
it's brilliant.
yes. Oh my God. It was an animated series called Animaniacs. And when, because I will always be transparent with all of you in the audience, after I had a newly minted degree and got 200 rejection letters in the early 1990s, I thought, well, it looks like I need a part-time job while I'm working through grad school. I was working at a very, very large like car parts warehouse, and everybody I worked with knew if I'm working like an 8 or 10 hour shift during the afternoon, you got to stay out of the break room, because Veles is going to grab that TV and he's watching Animaniacs during his lunchtime, and don't change the channel. So recently I've posted 2 links on Discord, for those of you that are on Discord, with the best of Bill and Hillary Clinton parts 1 and 2 of Pinky and the Brain. And I got to tell you, I was watching that and just rubbing my eyes. There's a scene in there where the 2 mice must pledge to an organization where everyone wears robes, including Henry Kissinger.
Oh.
When I saw, thank you, Algo, when I saw those animations in the 90s right out of college, I thought, wow, this is funny. It speaks right to the degree I just got. Now that I'm a lot older, I watch that stuff and it's like, this should have been my college courses.
So they were so good. Pinky, are you pondering what I'm pondering? Well, yeah, Brain, but when are we going to get rubber pants our size?
Oh, and the Brain, by the way, he has a Orson Welles. It was a guy actually who that was his thing, was he did like Orson Welles imitations or whatever, played Brain. But God, and that show, when they showed international leaders, and it was like tongue in cheek, and you would kind of catch an image or two, but man, even then they nailed. I mean, it wasn't Jeff Epstein level, but man, did they ever nail the like private parties with all the food and stuff. So speaking of Discord, my thanks to N.A. Knight for his excellent work on our Discord page, where he's been focusing on the speed of evolution in the nuclear power industry, as well as the micronuclear technology development. I know N.A. Knight fairly well, as one does on a chat board. Beyond his skill as a professional, and he and I've had many a private conversation about our past professional lives. And beyond the fact he most certainly knows what he's talking about, he has an excellent mind when it comes to trends on these topics. So I wanted to shout out to him and thank him again, because it's as the old saying goes, it's one less thing I got to deal with. I just kind of monitor what he's got out there, and if something looks good, I'll raise it on the show. Gold in Pennsylvania regarding the Finders Keepers case against the FBI. Nothing to report other than the fact that this week the FBI replaced their lead lawyer with another lawyer who, no joke, and I've been around the international environment, I cannot even pronounce this guy's name. I don't know what his ethnic background is, although I suspect, but why the attorney change, who knows? But I continue to monitor that case. One of several references today to Ozzy Osbourne. All I'll say about the passing of Ozzy, along with others this week, is I raised earlier this year, I didn't think he was long for this world. And frankly, I'm amazed he made it this far, given a number of factors. Much of his music, not all certainly, has been a part of my life since I was a kid, whether Black Sabbath or his solo work. Donut Factory has raised the specter of Ozzy's death being part of several high-profile deaths who've occurred recently. We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Given Ozzy's health, I don't know how much longer he would have been with us anyway. Typically, though, there's been an ocean of self-serving people trying to jump on the grief train over his passing. Music artists and actors whose connections to the man are dubious at best, who've been making posts on X and other social media about their relationship. Speaking purely from my corner of the universe, I wish those people would just shut the hell up. Vegas shooting. Last March, Revolver News had a segment about the Las Vegas shooting back in 2017. The story began by referencing the interview Glenn Beck had with an FBI whistleblower by the name of Steve Friend. What an ironic name. An interview where Friend, in my opinion, stated disinformation regarding the shooter, Paddock, potentially working with terrorists in a gun deal that went bad. This contrasts with the media personality Mindy Robinson, who produced a documentary about the Las Vegas shooting called Route 91, who references the country music performance where the shootings took place. Notable from her documentary is not just the facts who don't add up in the official story, but corruption who may have contributed. The net of that corruption is cooperation by state and federal officials to suppress efforts to investigate what occurred. One of the many items she raised is John Pelletier, who we've mentioned on this program before, the police chief in Las Vegas during that shooting. As many of you will recall, he also was the police chief in Maui during the fires. It's stunning that he wasn't the police chief in Los Angeles when the fires ripped through the Palisades, for that matter.
Jeez.
There's also another tidbit about him. He was accused of kidnapping a P. Diddy rape victim by force to prevent them from testifying. The sheriff in Las Vegas at that time, Joe Lombardo, refused to name or investigate the three other people who were registered in the hotel room where Stephen Paddock was staying. The same sheriff won an election after those events where 40,000 voters weren't able to vote due to a glitch at the Department of Motor Vehicles in Nevada. The winning margin of the sheriff was still very close despite the DMV failure. The county commissioner, Tick Segerblom, had pushed for drag queen story time in schools and then admitted he's attracted to kids. Mindy goes on to name many other officials whose level of corruption would make them an easy target to pressure in a cover-up. Obviously, following that article from last spring is the fact that Diddy has essentially walked. AI is your friend. A story popped up this week concerning AI worth noting. A company named Replit, R-E-P-L-I-T, was using AI to manage a software code freeze and loosely said something went wrong. When I say code, I mean software code or software code development, who can also be said as writing new software or modifying existing software. Due to the glitch, the result was all their production data was destroyed. What does that mean? Well, imagine a bank or an insurance company. You have software. Your employees and customers use or interact with that software. It might be over a web browser or similar, but they interact with that software. That's what they call production software. That's the stuff who runs your organization and helps you make money if you're a for-profit entity. Anything you're developing or make sure it's safe to put into production, you want to make sure it's safe to put into production, that environment is what we call a development or a test environment. And there's usually a firewall between the two. By design, it's not supposed to touch anything in production to avoid a variety of risks. I'm not sure of the specifics, but what occurred at Replit is the AI systems they were using crossed between the two environments and destroyed all their production data. When this kind of work is performed by organizations who know what they're doing, you have a person called a release manager. They're a human element who double or triple check something before you move it out of the development environment into production. Equally, they make sure nothing in production changes without a lot of checking. So why am I going into all this detail? Because you need to understand the basics to understand how dangerous what I just described is. Either the AI system they were using bypassed human decision-making, or more likely, they removed the human element entirely to save cost. Let's say that more bluntly. They laid people off, or just didn't hire the right people. Some of you might say, well, Veles, this sounds like a small company. They took some risks that most in industry know not to take. Unfortunately, that's not the case. During the last year, I've been in a very contentious situation with an organization who's doing things like this. Little to no documentation, no consistency in how they manage IT operations, and their frequent reply is, well, it's all automatic to avoid human mistakes. Wrong. It's neither about people or artificial intelligence. It's about following proper steps and checks and balances being followed. Mark my words, and to paraphrase the late actor and Congressman Fred Thompson, this business will get out of control and we will be lucky to live through it, unquote. Organizations will continue to push for artificial intelligence to manage things like this solely because of the cost until they get sued or investigated or both. Private equity. There's chatter in the private equity space new deals will begin negotiations or even be signed following Labor Day. A large contribution to this is evidently private equity firms, and one must assume others in the financial space, have been leveraging AI tools the last few months to identify opportunities. One should assume many of those deals will center on growth in AI technologies or their application. I find it ironic that AI systems are being asked which AI systems to invest in. I certainly hope none of these AI systems are self-aware. Oh, poor humanity, you just keep walking into that gopher hole every 50 years, don't you? Hunter Biden. I swear we're not getting enough love online for the work we do at Rogue. To my knowledge, we are the only alternative programming out there who in recent time asked, where's Hunter Biden and what is he doing?
Yes.
We had a brief segment about this last week. And then on Monday the 21st, Hunter comes out swinging out of the gates, storming with all sorts of opinions. I wonder what else we at Rogue can cause to happen simply because we brought it up. Sons. Some oddities in their correlation to contemporary time. In January of 1997, Ennis Cosby, the only son of Bill Cosby, was murdered while attempting to change a flat tire on the side of the 405 highway in Los Angeles. In 1993, Michael Jordan's father, James Jordan, was killed in North Carolina while supposedly sleeping in his car on the side of the highway. There's a belief in certain circles that if you're a high-profile individual, there's an expectation you may be asked to sacrifice something of great value, including a life. Yeah. When I say high profile, I mean folks in the media spotlight who operate at the direction of others, those others being people who want to remain in the shadows. Along these lines is a narrative about the sacrifice of the firstborn or key children in a family. Within the last 2 years, there have been theories raised. This is the reason for all the transgender focus in Hollywood. Slight sidebar. If we just purely look at the data, roughly speaking, those who self-identify as transgender in American society are like 2 to 3% of the population. Yet in Hollywood, it's closer to 30 to 40%, which begs the question, why? Within the last 2 years, this has been raised why there's that transgender focus in Hollywood. If a son self-identifies as a girl or a woman, according to this line of argument, they're now no longer vulnerable. Or equally, the firstborn child, if that child is a girl or a woman. Several commentators in the African-American community have raised the idea that the death of Michael Jordan's father may have had more to do than simply a horrible crime. Coming full circle on Monday this week, Malcolm Jamal Warner, who played Bill Cosby's son in the 1980s TV series, drowned during a family vacation. We'll delve into this more later. Pawn Stars and Epstein. Like a bad rendition of Pawn Stars, the TV show this week, the equivalent just happened. What if we release pressure on the government? Will you release the files on Epstein? Sorry, the best we can do is 230,000 files on Martin Luther King. This in relation to Monday's disclosure released by the U.S. government on MLK. On a broader and significant level, my friends, are the following. There's a flood of misdirection out there. Gus Demas spoke about this pattern years ago, as have I and others. There's always a list from bottom to top of folks the system will sacrifice. Always. On the latest topic, the public may have been suckered into demanding more disclosures about Epstein. Who knows? There's a much bigger fight going on right now between powerful interests, and that's why this is happening at all. How many memory hole items have disappeared where there was a strong public interest to know the truth? Heck, periodically, I have an entire segment here on Rogue that just focuses on memory hole items. Powerful people do not want this issue to die, and the public is going along with it. There's also a chumming of the water to give the public forms of disclosure. Patrick Bet-David, yes, V, I know, interviewed a self-described retired intelligence agent who said no one trusts Israeli intelligence, that Israeli intelligence is always trying to show up at your headquarters with bugged gifts. My first thought was, we're talking about intelligence people. Who doesn't try and bug each other's offices? That guest later went on to state everyone trusts British intelligence, and I thought, okay, that's a lie. But this is what I'm saying. Joe Rogan has been putting out content who sounds like disclosures. Many have said things critical of Israel lately. To me, that's just a pressure valve to say, okay, we've had and have issues with how Israel does things. That's a far cry from talking about Gaza or the USS Liberty. They're also intimating that something may come from interviewing Ghislaine at her prison in Florida by Congress. Okay, but remember, folks, Congress has no investigative or prosecutorial power. It's why whenever they hold hearings, the people being yelled at could care less and often are never under oath anyway. We do need to keep an eye on events like this as we get closer to August 5th, and I'm going to delve a lot today into August 5th. By the way, when those 230,000 files on Martin Luther King were released, my first thought was, yeah, because you have a series of shoeboxes that every time topics come up you want to go away, you grab one of those and release them to the public. You could have released all of this months ago, but you just keep doling it out in small amounts every time you need to distract. John Michael Karma, you're absolutely right. Mad Magazine's little spy versus spy cartoons. Fraud statistics. Thanks again to the Visual Capitalist website for the following. When it comes to revenue from fraudulent crime, and yes, that definition can go in a lot of directions, it breaks down as follows. From recent coverage of trafficked kids, among others, that category is $347 billion with a B annually. Drug trafficking is $783 billion. Terrorism financing is $12 billion. And the winner at $1.9 trillion is organized crime, corruption, and money laundering. We talk a lot here on Rogue about money laundering, especially in relation to Ukraine. Of course, a key consideration with numbers like these are how they were compiled. I'm quite serious about that because if some of those figures were derived from the FBI, how did the FBI develop those figures? One of my old-time favorites, FBI. If you knew for decades where the 5 families of the Cosa Nostra mafia families were, why didn't you arrest them? I mean, other than that file you released on Nancy Pelosi's family in January of 2021, the file who stated her family was involved with organized crime and were FBI snitches the entire time. So if the FBI has intelligence resources to identify that crime, why is that crime continuing? Main course. Beyond Star Trek, Roddenberry's broader creative vision. Gene Roddenberry's legacy extends far beyond his creation of Star Trek's franchise and its enduring cultural impact from the 60s to today. Throughout his career, Roddenberry developed numerous science fiction concepts that failed to achieve commercial success the way Star Trek did, often falling victim to network concerns about marketability, audience appeal, content boundaries, etc. Many of these unrealized projects reflected Roddenberry's persistent exploration of specific philosophical or historical themes that networks found uncommercial or potentially controversial. Roddenberry was attempting to pursue more intellectually ambitious narratives exploring humanity's origins, purpose, and potential. 2 productions from the 70s deserve attention because of their exploration of themes that would later emerge in alternative history research and ancient civilization theories. The first of these was a program called The Questor Tapes. It aired as a television pilot and featured a cast including Mike Farrell, who many of you might know as his role from B.J. Honeycutt and MASH. The narrative of the story centers on an extraordinarily advanced android created by an eccentric scientist who then embarks on a quest of self-discovery. The central revelation of the program is significant. The android represents one of many such beings constructed throughout human history to assist mankind's development. These artificial guardians were, according to the storyline, and I quote, built at the dawn of the world and were left here by the masters to serve and protect mankind. Intriguingly, these robot protectors operate according to a specific directive that echoes themes now common in alternative history theories. One of those being the robots are told, or the androids are told, we protect but we do not interfere. Mankind must make their own way. We guide them, but always without their knowledge. The concept of hidden guidance by advanced beings or technologies operating throughout human history while remaining deliberately concealed from human awareness was decades ahead of themes that are now being explored by researchers like Graham Hancock, Freddie Silva, or Mark Carlotto. The idea that humanity has received covert assistance from superior intelligence, whether extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or representing surviving remnants of lost advanced civilizations, has become foundational to contemporary alternative archaeology and ancient astronaut theories. Then we have Roddenberry's Genesis 2 program, which explored similar themes but through a different framework. In that story, a NASA scientist was developing suspended animation technology for future long-duration space missions when an earthquake damages his monitoring systems during his experimental hibernation. He wakes up 150 years later to discover that human civilization has experienced a catastrophic collapse. The post-apocalyptic world he encounters depicts humanity struggling to rebuild while desperately attempting to preserve technological knowledge and cultural wisdom from prior civilizations. The program's exploration of how advanced societies might attempt to safeguard critical information for future generations and how subsequent civilizations might recover and interpret those remnants mirrors arguments presented many years later by alternative historians, including theories around megalithic sites, encoded mythologies, and mysterious technological artifacts. Both of these shows align remarkably with concepts that emerged later in alternative research, including intervention in human development. These 1970s television concepts anticipated by decades the detailed arguments presented by researchers investigating ancient megalithic construction, anomalous archaeological discoveries, and mythological accounts of divine or supernatural guidance in human efforts. The specific idea that such intervention follows careful protocols designed to encourage human independence while providing subtle assistance has become a standard element in many theories. Roddenberry's exploration of these themes in the 1970s demonstrates remarkable foresight, equally begging the question, where did he receive the inspiration for these ideas, and how much actual fiction was involved in these television shows? Why university stress levels are part of something bigger. Regardless of what you see or think you see in the media right now about academia, I assure you massive changes are coming. I remember well the easy money era of the 1990s when telecommunications networks were literally being built everywhere. I used to warn my coworkers, this is going to have to end and end soon. There's no way they can keep this up sustainably. My coworkers responded to my input by buying houses and building pools. I, on the other hand, kept my resume current each month with updates. A similar reality is hitting academia right now. With my usual commentary, I will tell you both parties and both ideologies are responsible for letting this country get into this situation. We could provide an entire program at Rogue about how each stakeholder contributed via low-cost loans, government loans, promises of large salaries for degrees, endowments, and the list goes on. To oversimplify and quote Mike Rowe of America's Dirtiest Jobs, the United States is at extreme risk due to a lack of trade school graduates. We simply have a surplus of degrees we don't need, for whom the cost of earning them outweighs their value. The United States has roughly $1 trillion in college loans who will not be repaid. Regardless of the political games we've been playing with those loans in the last 10 years, we cannot put that off any longer. I believe in academic exploration, and if anthropology is your thing, and I'm a big fan of that field, please pursue it. But at the same time, please make sure you're realistic about your earnings potential, your job options, and backup options if that doesn't work out. The net of this being universities and colleges must become leaner in their operations and their degree programs. Where possible, they must find new sources of revenue beyond tuition and endowment funds. My recent direct experience watching town hall-like meetings at large universities who've begun the process of cutting back staff, professors, and research is telling. I'm quite literal when I tell you should see the anger, rage, fear, desperation, and pleading by people who've been impacted by these events. I've seen this sort of thing before, and there's a growing reality out there in certain sectors that we should be mindful. When friends of mine worked for NASA and the Space Shuttle program, and that program was canceled, there was a deep sadness in many sectors of the agency. So much energy, time, and effort was spent on human exploration, and there was little direction about what was coming next. In contemporary time, we know both human flight vehicles and heavy lift cargo vehicles are being developed by NASA for a return to the moon, along with commercial firms. That awareness didn't exist when the Space Shuttle program was canceled, and for many in the agency who'd spent their whole lives supporting that program, it sent them down a dark road. It's not like you work on something like the Space Shuttle and then just go take a job at IBM. As a result, that widespread depression left to some people taking their own lives. When the telecom sector collapsed in 2001, as many of you know, I was at the ground zero of that when it imploded, and it was ugly. It was a technology line of work, yes, but specific to voice and data communications. People often wave their hand and say, well, IT is IT. That's not true. That's like saying finance is finance. It's not a one-to-one line of work where every job is homogenous. Now we have countless people working for universities across several areas, whether administrative staff, graduate students, professors, and others who are being laid off. People who traditionally, once you made it into that line of work, rarely had any kind of layoff or termination. Same thing is occurring across many U.S. federal agencies right now. I would advise caution whether the view of one side about the private sector or the other side about federal and academic lines of work when there are large job losses. First, we almost operate like free agents regardless of the supposed loyalty folks are told they should give their organizations. Second, this is a terrifying experience for many who've been let down by the very institutions they worked for. Not because they lost their jobs, as that's just the nature of the world we live in. It's because they were told they wouldn't need coping skills, the ability to manage life trauma, and how to manage yourself professionally. There would be no need as you had achieved lifetime employment. Further, much like European social contracts, ideologically minded social engineers promised people, if you adhere to our ideological beliefs, we'll take care of you and you'll be safe. No, you won't. And the potential for social friction now is high. Beyond the social friction, we have a growing social mental health issue as well. The real explanation of foreign labor in California. Since the founding of the United States, we've had a troubled history in our understanding and discussion around labor. Said more bluntly, the people who provide labor, where they come from, and their protection in society. At the founding of the United States, we had indentured servitude and slavery, among a host of other ills. At its heart, though, was the economic reasons behind that reality. Thanks to industrialization, and frankly the fact Britain was losing money on the slave trade, mechanization removed the need for forced labor. Typical of America's history, we've had a bad habit of not planning things very well. We acknowledge and embrace a change, but we fall short on softening the blow. Note my earlier comments about those in traditionally safe industries facing layoffs. Just wait till senior leaders in business and government use artificial intelligence across the labor market. That's going to be a party. With the end of slavery, we told thousands of people they were free to move about the country, but with limited job skills, no legal knowledge, and few of them could read. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? So let's discuss a modern plantation, and I mean that in a literal sense. I don't mean abused Filipino workers in the homes of millionaires. No, I'm talking about California, or in fairness, California all the way through Texas. Since 1865, the industry and agriculture in the southwest of the United States benefited from the next closest thing to slavery. That would be labor from Mexico, and I'll also throw in labor from China that built the rail lines. Many South American governments, just like the elites of Mexico's government and banking sectors, think of themselves as elite Spanish before being ethnically Mexican. That's an important social separation. Mexico's current gross domestic product is 30% of remittances sent back to Mexico from those working in the United States. You cannot endanger $600 million of Mexico's elites' money without someone getting jacked up quickly. The elites of Mexico want that labor going across the border because, not to put too fine a point on it, those aren't their kids. It's labor from Mexico's poorer states and not Mexico's elites. Therefore, both elites in Mexico and the United States benefit from this arrangement. In the 1930s through the 1970s, when agricultural and other workers from Mexico came across the border, it wasn't much of an issue. We also didn't have the inflamed national view on the topic fanned by the internet like we do in 2025. It wasn't much of an issue as it was often seasonal in nature. The workers were needed. They had no legal rights. It was low cost. And we didn't have crime cartels on the border like we do now. Let's shift to the backstory in California, I think has been missed and is at the center of the hurricane. This deals with California's education system. In my line of work, I've had many experiences directly exposed to California's policies concerning what they call undocumented students at their universities. Undocumented in California means exactly that. It's someone residing in the state whose national origin is undocumented regardless of their age. Further, California law enforcement and government agencies are forbidden from helping U.S. government, especially ICE, with arresting anyone in the U.S. illegally. You may hear California universities have goals of 30% of their students being undocumented. That's not entirely accurate, though they do desire to attract those students. Ironically, since 2016 through 2023, enrollment of undocumented students in California dropped considerably. Without getting lost in the weeds, what's the backstory to all of this? Or said another way, what's the motivation? This is a simplification, but it's still technically correct. Nor will you hear anyone on either political or media side lay it out to you as I'm about to. So here goes. Given changing demographics, economics, and elite goals on both sides of the Rio Grande border, a form of deal was reached in October 2001. California signed legislation to support undocumented students in higher education. That deal centered on education for the next generation, not the current working generation who is in California, and that's important. Recalling again, California has always been a juggernaut of an economy, and its current GDP is $4.1 trillion. California is nearly double New York's GDP, and New York is in the number 3 spot, with Texas at number 2. By way of comparison, last year, California surpassed Japan in gross domestic product. Now, at the same time, you've heard me and others say often about California, beyond those GDP figures, there are 10 million people in Los Angeles County alone. Again, that's a juggernaut of money and population they can wield. That's more people than the state populations of several Western U.S. states combined. Now, as I noted a moment ago, California in 2001 shifted their value proposition to labor from Mexico. Rather than just offering employment, the ability to send money home, and educating their children in California's schools, they added something new. As long as mom and dad kept working in California, or one of them, the state would improve the odds of your child being one of the undocumented students at very good universities or even community colleges. The outcome being the next generation of those families lucky enough to attend a California university would have a much brighter future. Likewise, given cultural considerations, that undocumented student's graduation could lift their whole family with their success, not just their own. We've said on prior Rogue programs, California has lost many state residents and the wealth of those residents who fled the state. Yes, that is very true. At the same time, California's population is stabilizing due to immigration and in-state birth rates. We have a lot of moving pieces with this on a very important topic, so let's pull some strings together. Further, not only will no one in the balkanized U.S. media say what I'm saying today, California's government won't say it either. Everyone, whether pro or con on this topic, has a vested interest in hiding the truth. That's why getting to the bottom of this is so hard. Like I said, California's economy is immense, from technology to mining to agriculture to banking, and the list goes on. The powerful in California, and yes, nationally as well, need cheap or cheaper labor to keep that state's engine running. Mexico's elites are more than happy to enable that labor to come across the border. In California's past, the state had a lot of manufacturing, and that meant white and African-American middle-class families benefiting. That economic reality has shifted, as has the need for what we would traditionally consider middle class. Another generalization, but California's economy is somewhat becoming like South America. 1/3 of the economy is high wealth margin industries and high net worth people, and the other 2/3 are services and state government jobs, including academic research and medical services. Said another way, you have an elite class, a semi-elite class, and a very large labor class. Here's another statistic for you regarding that large labor pool. 30% of California's workforce is officially undocumented. When it comes to the topic of undocumented labor, I've shared previously, I was at ground zero of this in the 2000s. I worked on a federal effort at that time to create a guest worker program with full legal protection for those in it. Would those programs have heavily resolved all this friction on the West Coast and the Southwest and nationally? Yes. Was that program deployed? Of course not. Why? Because the current system keeps those workers in states like California indebted to the state and to the federal government. Because that current system enables those taking advantage of foreign labor to not be held legally accountable if any of those workers are hurt. Or to quote Mayor Bass of Los Angeles, and I quote, "How will we get our lawns mowed?" unquote. And that's a quote, by the way, by a woman who supported Fidel Castro. I mean, literally, she supported Fidel Castro. She's such an advocate of the people. My personal take on the topic is the current situation leaves those human beings, regardless of country of origin, at extreme risk. You'll also notice, at least to my knowledge, we've not had huge roundups of foreign labor at Tyson's Foods in Arkansas or similar. Oh, sure, some meatpacking plants in the deep south, but the absence of roundups in other states is telling. That's a rather notable if foreign labor is indeed what the government via ICE is concerned about. But wait, there's more. Look at the actual numbers of folks who've been, for lack of a better word, sent back to their countries of origin. Review the actual numbers on Obama, Clinton, and Biden administration deportations, or for that matter, George W. Bush. Are their numbers even close to these numbers? Well, they're much higher. The current administration's numbers are much lower. So is this entire theater you're presented with what this is really about? When you see on the news anything concerning protests in California on a variety of topics around ICE, this will better help explain the friction. Yes, there are people agitating the situation, but the emotions on the ground are genuine. I can guarantee you that. People from poor economic backgrounds have the potential for a better life for their kids and families in what is essentially a lottery. It's Logan's Run, the movie, but you do actually get to survive a renewal. So I'll say that again. It's a form of lottery for undocumented families in the state. They've known poverty and they're desperate not to lose that opportunity. Equally, there's a lot of anger on the ground in the state regarding state and federal cutbacks in healthcare, as well as university research. Of course there is, because California's undocumented labor needs that healthcare, and without the research funds, it's a double whammy to the schools. They lose funding from those who want to conduct research, and it denies their students the experience they need to graduate. Approaching this entire subject like a think tank, there's a conclusion you can draw. The social vulnerability in California is being struck and struck hard at precisely a moment where financially and politically the state is vulnerable. That's not just something who happens. We're witnessing a fight taking place between elements of or factions with loyalty to Davos and the London Corporation, or what's left of the London Corporation, noting prior rogue programs. And from my view, I would also throw in some folks in the banking and U.S. intelligence community with strong nationalist views. I know he's a hot button, but recall what the Donald told a reporter during the Metro protests back in 2020. It was a typical kind of remark he tends to make without thinking. The reporter asked about social issues causing the George Floyd and other protests. Trump responded by saying, "This is all being funded by wealthy families in the Northwest you've never heard of. It has nothing to do with social issues." My final comment on this topic is, no one is insane enough to shut down labor from Mexico moving into the U.S. Southwest. What is happening is immense pain to force various sides to revise how and in what way that occurs. And as usual with the average person caught in the middle. Now for my final and hard-hitting segment. Symbols, ritual, history, and oh my God, this might be true. This segment deals with content that some of you thoroughly believe in, some of you are unsure of, and others believe is as possible as aliens on the White House lawn. No worries, it's just a conversation. By the time I reach the end of this, you may say, no way. Some of you might say, well, that's an interesting theory. Some of you might find yourselves on the floor. The focus of this segment deals heavily with a book written by an author named S.K. Bain, B-A-I-N. The book's title is The Most Dangerous Book in the World. The book walks you through symbology involved in the attacks who occurred on September 11th in 2001. I'd like to note some contemporary events who play into this. Recall also my commentary from last week of ritual when it comes to Jeff Bezos' wedding in Venice and other recent events. Global elites, and not necessarily people in the public spotlight, have a belief system, religion, faith, call it what you will, who's very different from the rest of society. And of course they do. They believe they're better than the rest of society who's distracted with year-round sports on TV and American Idol. The world's apex elites are focused on much bigger concerns and areas of focus. From a donut factory program on YouTube this week, we have the following. Noting gematria, Ozzy Osbourne's name equates to the number 201. Malcolm Jamal Warner of the Cosby Show, who died this week, was in a TV show that had 201 episodes. He also died on the 201st day of the year. And for those of you who recall Event 201, who simulated a mass viral outbreak, the day that conference was held was the day that Jamal Warner's book about his experiences on the Cosby Show was published. And the list goes on. There are several meanings of the numerical sequence 201, including new beginnings, growth, change, collaborations, and partnerships. Donut's question from his program was, are we witnessing a major elite ritual? Then on Thursday, Hulk Hogan, Chuck Mangione, the composer and horn player, and George Koumans, the guitarist and composer of the band Golden Earring, all died. But wait, I have more. Lemmy Kilmister of the band Motorhead and Ozzy Osbourne were friends in the genre of metal music and had a couple of song duets, including one of my favorites, I Ain't No Nice Guy. Lemmy Kilmister's last show was December 11th of 2015. Lemmy died on December 28th of 2015, which is 17 days after his last show. Ozzy Osbourne's last show was July 5th, and Ozzy passed away on the 22nd. That was 17 days after his last show. All the people who died this week were connected to high-profile entertainment, except for Hulk Hogan, and they were in the music industry. People often say high-profile deaths always come in threes. Maybe that's not a coincidence. The argument could be certainly made this ritual is zeroing in on August 5th. That ever-recurring theme of August 5th we will explain. The net for all of you is be very wary in the days leading up to Tuesday, August 5th in about 2 weeks, and the days that follow. Let me also state before I delve into S.K. Bain's book the following. Do I believe there are apex elites in our world? Of course. Noting my comment on last week's program, and in particular my reference to the movie The Ninth Gate, do they possess in part or in full knowledge of ancient practices prior to the last age? Again, I strongly believe yes. Do I believe they uniformly follow those practices to the same end or goals or conclusions? Absolutely not. More specifically, I do believe, despite the Dune-like aspects of global apex elites, there's a group of them, a fringe, if you will, who we, the little people, would call evil, or said another way, more evil than actions of their counterparts. It's a statement as old as time. It's not your beliefs. It's what you do with them. They also have very specific reasons why they do these things and commit these acts. Noting our frequent reference to elites speaking to each other and us via the media and culture, please consider this analogy. For those of you who know the Star Wars storyline or canon, there are 3 kinds of Force practitioners in that storyline. There are the Jedi, who seek to use the Force through peace and emotional control. There's the Gray Jedi, or Gray Force users, who operate between light and dark. And then the Sith. The Sith embrace anger, pain, and the pursuit of power. Sith are apex elites, but they follow a different path than the other 2. Because they're an extreme form of the belief, there are fewer of them. Also, they're often more powerful than their counterparts in the Jedi or the Gray users. Because they're at an extreme end of that belief system, they do possess more power on an individual basis. This analogy to that fiction can help give us reference to what I'm about to cover. Bain's book provides a basis for several ancient belief practices and how they align with the events of 9/11. I assure you the content of his book is not simply coincidences, especially considering Donut Factory and others who delve into esoterica and similar in world events. Are all their views correct? Well, I leave that to you, but there's enough accuracy out there to warrant serious consideration. This content is straight up Jet Blake material for those of you who know Jet. Beyond his book's content, he touches on a theme beyond contemporary time. That being that human sacrifice is one thing, but massive human sacrifice is another. For instance, the Inca of Peru carried out human sacrifice, but they did it in a very limited way, and it was treated very sacredly, versus the industrial scale of the Aztecs. Noting my analogy to the reference point of the Star Wars fictional universe, we have real-world examples. We've had societies and groups who believe massive bloodletting and sacrifice is necessary. The Aztecs, the Moche, the worshippers of Moloch and Baal, the Thuggee cult of India, and the list goes on. Also consider the following, which is on the opening of today's program, which was the pyramid you saw. That is the pyramid of Dashur that was built in ancient Egypt. That pyramid is also known as Sneferu's Bent Pyramid. Recent archaeological re-examination has suggested a reason for why that pyramid has a strange bend at its midpoint as it rises to the top. Traditional archaeology states that bend is because the engineers building it realized the structure could never support the weight, and so they shortened the scale from the midpoint to the top. New research suggests something darker, and that is, there's the image, and that is that the pyramid represents a mathematical equation indicating worship of the god Set. You'll recall Set killed Osiris, sending us down the whole 3-day resurrection thing and the importance of the numbers 1, 13, and 14. So why would you build a pyramid dedicated to the villain? Well, that's what Bain's book is about. People who commit horrible acts because they worship the villain. You can also infer from Bain's book about 9/11 2 additional items. First, there are those who go along with these acts because they don't realize what they're involved in until it's too late. Something who would remind us of many famous people caught up in Hollywood or similar who once they're in can't get out. Please see Scientology. Second, In the 24 years since that event this September, hypothesis regarding various governments or intelligence agencies who were involved is in part misdirection. You all know the narrative. Well, it was Al-Qaeda. Then years later, a statement is made, okay, we'd also like to say mistakes were made by our own intelligence agencies in stopping this thing. Then years after that, okay, we'd also like to further add we may have had terrorists on the intelligence agency payrolls. Then following that, fill in the blank. The truth being something far more intense and harder to accept. The following is the boiled down version of what Bain is conveying in his book. And that is this. There are elements of apex elites whose belief system is a cult based on the timing of the star Sirius. We know from people like Graham Hancock, Freddie Silva, and Mark Carlotto many ancient structures and beliefs centered on Sirius all the way prior to the last ice age. Again, it's not about your belief system. It's about what you do with it and how you interpret it. This cult believes in symbolic sacrifices at symbolic locations during key astrological events. They also incorporate into their beliefs ritual humiliation, ridicule, and debasement of the value of those killed. Please consider our content on prior programs about African American men expected to wear a dress in public or in a movie. Consider all the famous Hollywood actresses whose nude photos were leaked to the internet in one big release. Consider media stories about average or greater than average people who've experienced something profoundly embarrassing or tragic. I mean, how many times do we have to revisit the topic of the submersible who exploded near the Titanic? How many times must a celebrity figure be ridiculed by the media repeatedly? For those of you who remember the author and investigator Gary Webb of Kill the Messenger movie fame, he investigated the truth of government narcotics dealing in the inner city, and they absolutely destroyed him until he took his own life. In that example, you could even say their retribution caused him to take his own life, and that in and of itself was a ritual. According to Bain, the events of 9/11 was a massive ceremony of ridicule and mockery of those who died, among other elements. Notable items from the book. First, the 9/11 Commission was stonewalled by multiple U.S. government agencies who refused to cooperate or aid their investigation. In fact, some of you may not know this, but members of the government's 9/11 Commission wrote their own book called Without Precedent, where they cited the degree to which they were blocked. The second item, 14 countries. Yes, I know the number 14. But there were 14 countries who raised concerns with the U.S. about an imminent attack. Those intelligence agency communications included Washington, D.C. and New York as possible targets. Third, there were 46 military and defense drills that day. 46. Many of those were focused on events similar to what occurred that day. And it's another reason why the air traffic controllers and others kept asking, for those of you who've listened to the tapes, and they were told, hey, an aircraft has struck the World Trade Center, an aircraft has struck the Pentagon. People on the other end of the line kept saying, but isn't this just another drill? Fourth item, insider trading by those who benefited by their trades in correlation to the attacks made over $15 billion. Fifth, the psychological manipulation prior to and after the attacks on the public has been extensive, ongoing, well-organized, and well-funded. Sixth, Bain describes the events of 9/11 as a global mega ritual. Seventh, there are several numerical significances to flight numbers that day. Flight 175 adds up to 13. Flight 11 can be inferred as relating to the two towers themselves. Flight 93 adds up to 12. Flight 77 relates to the sacred Gemini of the number 7 when that flight struck the Pentagon. The Pentagon is a five-sided object, which is also esoterically significant. The Pentagon is within view of the Washington Monument, who's 555 feet high. Then we have the esoteric meaning behind Flight 85. Well, Veles, who was Flight 85? Well, you probably want to read the book. Eighth, William Wynne Westcott, who lived from the mid-1800s to the 1920s, was a British coroner, ceremonial magician, theosophist, Freemason, and founder of the group The Golden Dawn. That organization being a secret society focused on occult, hermeticism, and metaphysics. He was quoted as saying, and I quote, "There's a number with an evil reputation among all peoples. The Kabbalists contrasted it with the perfection of the Decad, who's the number 10, as well as a cluster of 10 musical notes, and represents all good things. So 11 is the essence of all that is sinful, harmful, and imperfect," unquote. Also, Aleister Crowley, for those of you who know Crowley, aside from referencing to himself as the beast, said his number was 11. Crowley was also a member of the Golden Dawn. Crowley also wrote a book on esoteric beliefs called the Liber Astarte 175, or when translated from Latin means a new start or freedom for a new start 175, noting flight number 175. Ninth, the former Twin Towers in New York were considered by some as representations of the Pillars of Hermes. What's the importance? According to legend, one of the two pillars was made of gold and the other of emerald. One could infer paper money and money made from metal, given much of the business who went on in those buildings. According to the ancient scholar Solon, both pillars glowed at night, which immediately elicits the question, you mean like giant office buildings? The Pillars of Hermes were supposedly built prior to the Great Flood and memorialized the Greek victory over Atlantis. How many of you are familiar with the term Atlantis Rising? 10th, there are several references to the image of a goat during the events of that day, not the least of which was the book the kids were reading when President Bush was informed of the attacks. 11th item, the Pentagon officially opened on September 11th, 1941, and was attacked exactly 60 years later to the day. 12th, the United States has several what are known as E or Echo-4B aircraft, who are 747-200 model planes converted to act as command and control aircraft in case of national emergency or nuclear conflict. The E-4B, who was strangely flying around the Capitol that day, had a call sign who was Venus 77, Venus being an analogy to ISIS and other symbolisms, and the number 77, same as the flight that struck the Pentagon. 13th item, Building 7, beyond the often repeated comment about how did it collapse because nothing hit it, the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, for the city of New York was in that building. Unlike a lot of EOCs, it was not on the ground floor, but the 23rd floor of the building. This is a debatable point, but many of you know I've worked with EOCs nationally. Putting that center high in a building is not a good idea. Depending on where and how used, yes, access to look around a hospital or city or university might be ideal. But having the actual center itself located on a top floor is not a good idea. Then, due to the EOC being located in that building, the facility had backup generators installed and plenty of diesel fuel to power them located on site, fuel that was later blamed for fires that kept burning in the building. The Port Authority of New York said both its location and how it was set up was wrong and should be moved. Some even called the site Giuliani's skybox in the sky. Historically, once the second tower of the World Trade Center was struck that morning, the EOC was evacuated and there was no alternative site, the lack of which added to confusion in response and management of the disaster. The 14th item, let's step back into antiquity and remember how our worldview is shaped. Recall the discoveries at Göbekli Tepe, where it was suggested the animal figures on the lintels are in fact constellations. For over 1,000 years, we've thought of Orion as a human figure holding a bow or a sword. But in the far more ancient past, that constellation was associated with a condor or a large bird. In contemporary times, we associate the beginning of a new year with early winter in the Northern Hemisphere on the first day of January. But in ancient Egypt, the new year was timed with the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, who occurred just before the annual flooding of the Nile. That month in the Egyptian calendar is associated with the god Thoth, the recorder of the gods, and also known as the god of time. In modern times, that month is September, and the day is the 11th. But wait, there's more. Due to precession, where due to the Earth's wobble, we work our way over 25,920 years through all 12 houses of the zodiac, the September 11th date from the ancient world has shifted. It's shifted 45 days. The new date for the heliacal rising of Sirius is August 5th, or 8-5, recalling the other aircraft I mentioned. In conclusion, from prior programs, we've discussed the theory the reason for the removal of JFK as president in 1963 was due to the following. JFK and those backing him wished to shift the global economic model away from conflict to something else as a foundation. The something else being space exploration and technology development who could sustain the global economy but focused on different outcomes. That theory states JFK had to be removed because of those in opposition who feared the world was not ready for such a shift. Equally, it would cause too much disruption among the world's elites by shifting the global economy to such a massive degree. Let me offer you this hypothesis. There may be even an even darker reason at work, namely the sustainment of a world of conflict enables certain parties aware of ancient beliefs and faiths to continue the spilling of innocent blood to advance their aims. Simply said, JFK and his allies had to be stopped, not because of a massive global economic shift, but because it disrupted their view of the world. In conclusion, just a reminder, please remember to subscribe and have your friends subscribe to us on YouTube and Rumble, and I yield the floor.
Hey, man, great stuff, fellas. Excellent breakdown of everything that's been happening right now, and a lot of key information from some behind-the-scenes intel. So really appreciate it. Cowboy, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. Ozzy Osbourne did a song called Mr. Crowley, going back
Yes,
to that.
he did.
Oh,
Yes,
shit,
he did.
really?
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
one of their best stuff. And in the song, it seems like he's chastising Crowley for going too far with his stuff. And when I went to Scotland, we drove by his house where supposedly he tried to call in all of the demons of hell, and I think he fasted for several weeks, and he waited till a full moon and all this crazy stuff, and that house is burned several times. Now, Ozzy also died, going back to the gematria thing, and I think I think it was his name that equaled 44 in gematria, and he died 44 years after the release of The Blizzard of Oz, and 43 years after Randy Rhoads died. So and these are, I grew up on this kind of music. Those guys are my heroes. In fact, I saw a kind of an AI photo. It was Ozzy and Randy Rhoads and Ronnie James Dio and Lemmy were all sitting at a table. But there was more to talk about. But suffice it to say, I the gematria thing and a lot of this stuff, whether you believe in it or not, it's kind of the Veles thing. Whether it's true or not, or whether it's real or not, they believe in it. So it's good to know what it is, right?
Here's another small soundbite. You know who bought Crowley's house in the 70s?
I think you've told me, but I forgot.
Jimmy Page.
Yes, I did know that.
And it was in that house that John Bonham died. Or not John Bonham, sorry, Jason. No, yeah, John Bonham died. His son Jason's still alive, but
I thought John Bonham died in Pittsburgh when some stage equipment crashed on him.
No.
No?
No, it was he one of his drinking binges. He died supposedly the same way Hendrix did. He choked to death from he was laying on his back, and he was just so out of it that there was nobody there to check on him. But yeah, Bonham died in Crowley's house. Page bought Crowley's house. There's a whole, like a better way of saying this, there's a whole industry out there of people who have dug into that topic. And again, as Algo just said, folks, I mean, I'm simply presenting views that folks have conveyed and sprinkled in some of my own input and thoughts on it. But like I said, that's got a lot of coincidence here. If this is just, that's all coincidence. It's like, well, we're up to 250 coincidences. How many do I have to hit until you start thinking there might be something behind this? But it's also one of those topics that I was literally speaking with a close friend of mine the other day, where I said, if I knew at 25 what I know now, and I'm talking about like really behind the scenes stuff about the world in which we live, I'm like, it would have broken me like a small child. There's no way at 25 I could handle what I know now. And so, it's, and when we say they, again, there's always factions. It's not that all apex elites believe in this stuff, but there are elements of the apex elites who do. And it's just, I mean, at its, I don't want to say simplest, that's not the right way to put it, but a most direct example who to me undeniably cannot be argued is simply coincidence, is what we covered a couple of weeks ago about Jack the Ripper. And that's thanks to Matthew Ehret's work, among others. There is no way on this earth Jack the Ripper's killings were not a ritual.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to like trying to explain this to the uninitiated, if you will, that's why you couldn't get it at 25, because you had to slowly get information over time by the spoonful rather than drinking from a fire hose. And that's why most people are just stupid. They don't want to take the time to dig in. And anyway, that's not us, and it's about all I have to say.
It's my favorite analogy from Saturday Night Live. Well, what's the most incredible thing there is? Professional wrestling is real. Oh my God! Right. That's why you can't handle the number one thing, because your head would explode.
Speaking of, Hulk Hogan, by the way, rest in peace.
Yeah,
the Hulkster. Just a lot of people in 1 week.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. But Hulkamania's still running wild, brother.
Chris M, thank you,
brother.
Chris M, thank you for the correction. What do you call it? Bonham died in Windsor. I could have sworn it was Crowley's house, but you're correct. It was Windsor. My bad.
Well, guys, thank you all for joining us today, and everyone, thank you for listening to us. We'll be back Monday. Enjoy your weekends, everybody. Cheers.